All right. Hey, everybody. Hey, Terry. So nice to see you. I wish I could see you in person sometime. We'll get together after I'm back from Maine. Um, if everybody wants to put in the chat kind of hey and where you're from, that's been so fun to see how many different people from all over the world have been joining us. Also, remember, make sure if you're here for a CEU that you comment in the chat. And today, hopefully, we're going to use some examples from kind of last week. Feel free to kind of put examples that you want us to kind of talk through in the chat, and we'll see if we can get to them all. Hopefully today, we've got a little bit kind of more freedom to kind of jump around. So, and I also realized that Katie and I haven't introduced ourselves in a while. For new people, so we've been seeing a lot of familiar faces, which is so fun to have everybody kind of following us kind of through these crowdcasts and kind of building on what we've been doing. But I think it'd be nice for new people just to know who we are. So I'm Rosalie, and I'm a board certified behavior analyst. We have a small practice in Evergreen, Colorado. And just a quick tidbit, my wheelhouse kiddo is kind of highly verbal, big behavior, and sometimes twice exceptional kiddos, I guess, is another little part of that. So go ahead, Katie, you do a quick one.
And I am Katie Thomas. I'm also a BCBA. I've been working with Rosalie for about 7 years now, and she has opened my eyes and my world to how to use ABA with highly verbal kiddos.
Yep, that's what we've been working really hard on. So hi from Boston. Oh, Leanne, I'm going to be in Boston on Monday. And a fun tidbit, Katie and I both go to Maine for the summer. So who knew? Two people that live in Colorado then go to Maine for the summer. So, all right. After that little quick intro, just so people know who we are, I am going to share my screen and we will get started. All right. So the first thing, we're just going to kind of bring an umbrella. Oh, no. Don't tell me that. June's always kind of rainy up there anyway, isn't it? So we're going to kind of start off today again, like we've been doing a lot with kind of our point of view, which is the noticing grid. Most of our kind of treatment approach and strategies, really kind of hinge on this noticing grid. So looking at kind of level 1, or you'll hear Katie and I talk about, green. I think I said last week a kiddo had done chili peppers, different chili pepper, heat level of chili peppers you eat, which I thought was really cool. But level 1 is kind of that just right for the environment, matching the context, calm, slow, engaged. Level 2 is that getting a little bit too big for the environment. And level 3 is kind of definitely too big for the environment or the context. And then we've got kind of our 3 sections of this, which support individuals in kind of learning how to kind of track their behavior and the consequences of their behavior, and take a little bit more kind of ownership of kind of how things are going to turn out for them. So we've got what people are going to see, our objective behaviors, what other people are going to do. So are they going to contact reinforcement, or are they going to contract something kind of neutral, or is it going to be something that may be averse, not necessarily a punisher, but just something that isn't preferred. And then replacement behaviors are always part of this noticing grid as well. How do I get back to a level 1, maintaining contextually appropriate behavior that shifts and ebbs and flows with the context? So do you want to add any tidbits, Katie?
I think you got it all.
All right, that was a quick overview of the noticing grid. If you haven't done our crowdcast on the noticing grid, it's still up for free. Definitely head back over there. It's an amazing self-monitoring tool, and really it supports a lot of aspects of intervention. So last week we kind of went over our kind of ABC skill access and kind of supporting those learners that are really unpredictable, that show up kind of differently.
Hey, Rosalie, can you maybe zoom it in a little bit?
Ooh, yep, thanks. Let me make it bigger, hopefully. Oh, there we go. Is that better if I move it out? that a little bit better?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And I guess, and you guys can chime in on the side too if you want it in or out a little bit more.
Yeah, just let us know. So again, the crowdcast, the way you shared the screen is a little bit, I don't know. I got to put a like support ticket in or something. Anyway, I love crowdcast. I should not complain. So anyway, just that kind of ABC skill access. So helping to make that kind of unpredictable learner a little bit more predictable based on objective behaviors, that we see from them from kind of day to day or moment to moment. Christy, you should be able to access it at the top of the chat feed. I put a link up there so that you can have access. So just a quick overview of that and that kind of example that we put together. And we talked a lot last week about this kind of pendulum of optimal learning. So really kind of trying to get our pendulum to settle in the middle where the individual is sustaining that level 1 on their noticing grid, but maybe popping up a little bit to a 2 sometimes because we're increasing the demands a little bit, but not increasing the demands so much that we're spending time in that kind of level 3 on the noticing grid where things are getting, we're getting a lot of behavior and things are getting dangerous or unsafe, or we're just wasting a lot of intervention time having to wait out behaviors. And then also that pendulum on the other side, which is they're engaged in doing exactly what they want to do. And they're staying at that level 1 or, green on their noticing grid, but we're not engaging them in enough kind of learning trials. So, oh, great. Nice to see you, Megan. And then we talked about kind of the hierarchy of reinforcement and kind of how to develop tiers of reinforcement that are specific to the learner to deliver kind of based on kind of their skill presentation. Like, did they do a skill that was exactly what you were looking for? They're going to get kind of the best reinforcer out there. Did they, did they do something that was closer to their goal, but it wasn't like the best? All right, kind of you're going to get a little something different. And also kind of how to kind of survey the environment for reinforcers. We actually had a really great discussion about this with our RBT team about kind of how do we move away from kind of more contrived reinforcers like token economies or kind of first then boards, and how do we kind of move to where we're kind of developing this hierarchy of reinforcement where more and more things are important, where you can deliver reinforcers kind of just purely in an operant way where it's not necessarily that you're setting up, if you do this, you're going to get this, but hey, wow, that behavior was so much closer to your goal. Let me deliver a reinforcer to you. So this hierarchy of reinforcement kind of supports your ability to kind of do that and move more towards that kind of more, I don't know, what would you say, Katie? Natural environment kind of reinforcers, less contrived. Is that what you would say?
Yeah, I usually say like reinforcers naturally occurring in the environment is like the script I have around it.
Yeah.
Less contrived, sure. I like though too.
Yeah. Yeah, and more you can fade more easily kind of to another setting as well, kind of once you have this hierarchy developed. And then I think we kind of jumped in a little bit into kind of this, complex chains of behavior. Did we talk about that, Katie? I can't even remember. Uh-oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. There you go. I don't think we did last week.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about this.
Okay.
This is a fun kind of intervention tip to especially with these kind of complex, highly verbal learners. Sometimes we get these kind of chains of behavior that, are kind of reinforced over time. And it's kind of hard to kind of get rid of a part of the chain. And I think sometimes that's where we get a little bit stuck. So that's kind of on the behavior reduction side. On the kind of behavior acquisition side, we also have really kind of complex chains of behavior that, in order for an individual to use them in the natural environment, in kind of changing contexts, they have to be able to do these skills as a chain of behaviors. For example, they have to be able to kind of like notice, oh, like I'm doing a really hard math sheet and my frustrated emotion is showing up and I need to do something about it. Otherwise, I'm going to get to a 3 on my noticing grid. And then, I'm not going to have access to my favorite things. People aren't going to engage with me. They're going to wait for me to calm down and I'm not going to be able to do anything until I'm back to a 1. So that's a really complex kind of chain of behaviors that this kind of hierarchy of reinforcement can support you in developing and putting that chain of behaviors together. So you might start off with, if that learner can identify that something's hard, that's amazing. And initially, kind of during treatment, that might result in a kind of a high level kind of reinforcer on that hierarchy. But then as they kind of acquire that, then you might kind of chain on, okay, that was hard. What emotion is showing up when you notice that that's hard? And then that kind of noticing that it's hard gets a lower level reinforcer on that hierarchy. And being able to say out loud what emotion shows up might get a higher level on that hierarchy. It might get the top reinforcer because it's a new skill and it's in acquisition. And then so on and so forth until you've got this whole chain of behaviors where it's like, oh, when something's hard in my context, like I can notice it's hard, say what emotion's showing up, and I can deploy a skill that I need to use in order to kind of stay at a level 1 on my noticing grid. Go ahead, Katie, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, I think this is like a really good time to point out that I think sometimes one of the things that we do that can be a really hard concept to people is using escape as reinforcement. And it's because of this behavior chain that we're able to do it. Like, yes, we do provide reinforcement, or we provide escape for reinforcement for some of our kiddos, like in that situation where something is hard, but we're building a chain of behaviors and then adjusting the hierarchy of reinforcement to grow the skill. It's not just, okay, you get to not do this and we're going to leave it there.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. That's so important. Through your FBA, through observing in the environment, you might find out that escape and like time away is really kind of the most powerful reinforcer for your learner. And it's okay to use that. I mean, negative reinforcement is amazing. So it's okay to use that as your kind of, top of your reinforcement hierarchy, as long as you're kind of sitting in that pendulum of optimal learning is sitting where you're able to engage them. I think we get into trouble with negative reinforcement and using escape as a reinforcer when we're sitting way too far over on that pendulum side where the kid's kind of doing whatever they want because we walk over and they say, it's too hard. And then we go, oh, okay, you don't have to do it. And then we walk back over and, and that just becomes a cycle, right? Then that learner's sitting at that level 1. They're not getting enough opportunities to learn how to kind of move up a little bit, how to kind of increase that tolerance bit by bit. So that's just kind of a different way of thinking about building tolerance, especially in these kind of chains, these complex chains of behavior, which all of us are operating on chains of behavior all the time and different schedules of reinforcement. Teaching appropriate escape is so important. I've been trying so hard to figure out a way to, especially for kind of BIPs at schools, how do I write in there? Because, a lot of goals kind of end up being, we'll complete, non-preferred work tasks with, 2 or less avoidant behaviors. And I'm like, wait a second. Escape is okay. It just depends on the topography. Is it appropriate or is it not appropriate? So trying to figure out ways to support schools in that. Go ahead, Katie.
It just makes me laugh because I can think of like way more than 2 escape behaviors I use when I have to get work done, but I still get my work done.
Right.
I get there. I don't miss a deadline, but I sure do engage in a lot of avoidant behavior until I get there.
Oh my gosh, sometimes I'll even clean my house, which is a highly non-trigger for me to not have to engage in report writing, which is something that I really dislike. So sometimes that's a great way to kind of explain it to teams, but I still think needs to be a mind shift that's coming, but it's just a little late to the table. So when you're thinking about kind of this hierarchy of reinforcement, I guess the big takeaway is really think about kind of how you can chain those behaviors together that need to be used together in order to be successful in changing context, right? Like, because all of us are really great at developing stimulus control and kind of getting kids to kind of utilize skills in one area. But then I think as a field, we kind of struggle to move kind of to that generalization where when you take the kid out of kind of the therapy setting, put them back in the kind of natural context with mom and dad, or you put them back in school, or, for them to actually demonstrate those skills. And I think we've seen a lot once we can get these complex chains of behavior launched into acquisition, that we're seeing that kind of generalization across changing contexts without having to do like reprogramming. Like I feel like a while ago, I would do reprogramming where it was like, all right, I got this one environment. Now let's get this next environment. Okay, I got one person in. Let me get these other people in. So anyway, that's my food for thought there. And then let's kind of move into, and then also just another huge point about those kind of behavior chains. They can support, a lot of us are learning a lot about ACT, and I'm definitely not an ACT expert, but I love ACT. And I think one thing we've seen too with these behavior chains is they allow kind of the individual to start moving towards kind of intrinsic motivation and kind of actually contacting things that are important to them rather than being kind of pliant and just, following directions or doing a task because they know they're going to get something. Like they know they're going to get, a token or an iPad, or, they're going to get 20 minutes on the TV, or they're going to get a break. But they're actually doing it because it matters to them. And they're actually contacting that reinforcement. So that's been huge. All right. So let's get rolling into kind of systematically increasing demands. And doing it in kind of a data-driven way that's still flexible. Because kind of like we said last week, individuals show up, especially these highly verbal guys who also maybe have a mental health diagnosis, anxiety, DMDD, attachment type stuff. Those guys show up a little bit differently every day. Trauma history or diverse history. So thinking about how do I increase these demands in small, doable steps? And I think that small but doable is huge. And we're talking, sometimes it's like a quarter of a step. I mean, sometimes it's an eighth of a step, depending upon the learner, depending upon the day, and depending upon where they're at on their kind of noticing grid and the behaviors they're showing. Go ahead, Katie.
I have found it really helpful when kind of trying to figure out these small but doable steps to work with a kiddo. I'm like, well, what's too hard? Like, what's not doable? And kind of working with them to figure that out. And then together we are like, okay, well, what's the step down from that? So including them in that process, I've found super helpful, and you get that buy-in with them too.
Oh my God. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. Because yeah, right. These guys are highly verbal. They kind of know what they can do and can't do. Some of them believe they can't do things that we clearly know that they can do, which is okay too. But definitely involve them in that. Like, all right, like, I'm thinking that you can do this. What do you think you can do? can be a great way to kind of build that, and also get them to really kind of want to try this and to try to increase their access. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, and I'm probably just repeating myself, but the whole concept, like I think you get these kiddos sometimes who are going to be like, I can't do that. I can't do that. Nope, I can't do that. I can't do any of it, like you were saying. And so I do find that well, what is too much? If you can get them to say that, like all of a sudden as you start stepping it back, it's like, well, buddy, you can't not do all of it. Like you could, where do we start? So I think really getting them engaged in that way is helpful.
Yeah, it's almost like you lay out a task analysis of what you're wanting them to do.
Yeah, because I feel like if you don't give them a starting point, like they'll just kind of fight you the whole way.
Yeah. And like you can add like silly things on there that like that they can clearly do. Like even like, can you look at the back of the paper? Like can you you don't even have to look at the actual
Yes.
When you look at a piece of white paper, because any worksheet starts as a white piece of paper. So that's totally the bottom of that kind of, task.
Right.
So putting silly stuff in there can kind of help you to build that, to build up kind of those steps, those little tiny increases in demands. And then, it's okay if you kind of ebb and flow on your kind of scale, right? So one day, if that kiddo is kind of having an A access day where they're just rocking everything, and if I use, I don't know, completing work is always kind of an easy one to kind of to provide an example with. So if we say, the goal is for them to be able to sustain a level 1 while completing an age appropriate kind of math active, or a level appropriate for them math worksheet. On an A day, I might be able to kind of walk in and kind of, through those objective behaviors, see that they're having an A access day, and decide, all right, like, hey, I'm going for this today. Like, hey, I want you to look at the math sheet and I want you to complete it. That's kind of the top of the chain, and it might occur, like it might happen. And then obviously I'm going to kind of deliver the highest reinforcer on my reinforcement hierarchy. Go ahead, Katie.
For like a non-schoolwork example, I used it with a kiddo who was really had a difficult time when he would make mistake when he was drawing and coloring. So I would kind of use the A versus B day to kind of determine, how much can I push him with this concept. And what I was doing was kind of sabotaging his work in a lot of ways. Or, we would say, like, he would start drawing and I would start drawing and we would switch artwork. And he didn't really like that because now his artwork was changing. So that was an example where I used a lot of this that wouldn't be like sitting down and doing a math worksheet, just stress tolerance to that activity of coloring.
Yeah. Let's throw out a couple more examples, because I think work's always an easy one to think about, but let's throw out a couple more. Like another kind of area that we might use this is in kind of, tolerance to the presence of siblings. Oh, was that yours? Okay, I'll let you do that one. I'll do another one. So another area would be like community participation, where on like an A access day, I might show up and I see all those kind of objective behaviors, like eye contact, engaging with me, being flexible. And so I say, hey, come on, we're walking to the park. Awesome. Deliver my kind of highest reinforcer on my hierarchy. Next day, I kind of show up and I'm kind of, whoa, I'm seeing some kind of B access stuff. Like I'm seeing less eye contact. I'm seeing, I'm hearing less language. I'm seeing kind of a flatter affect. And I might say, hey, if we go out today, what would be a couple of places that you want to go? And just getting some language about going on a community outing, rather than placing the demand of we're going on a community outing and sitting through 3 hours of behavior, maybe locking myself in the bathroom to stay safe. And then obviously there's in between there, I could also kind of, on a B day, I might even suggest like a highly preferred outing, which would still be an increase in demands from talking out loud about kind of going on an outing, but it also isn't as high as, saying, hey, we're going to the park, which may or may not be a preferred activity. All right, Katie, do your sibling example.
So we have one, we do it with a little girl. She's on a talker, and so she has really low distress tolerance. So just her sibling, like, she's a younger sister, so her sister loves to come in and like read with us, and her tolerance that can be really low. So on an A day, we'll have her come in, and we might do a lot of reminding her of like, hey, look, Peyton, your sister's coming in, you got this, and try to engage her in the activity with her sister and really point out like the fun that we're having. That we're staying calm, we're staying slow, great job staying green. Where on a B day, we're sitting down to read, sister comes in, we might prompt her right away, hey, remember, you can always ask for a break if this gets hard, just to try to get that language rather than just blocking it from happening. How can I get her to try to communicate on those B days that like, I need a break, I need some space on this today.
Yeah, that's a great example. So, and I'm even thinking, like other areas that we've used this are, completing kind of household chores or stuff, things that kind of are important to parents. You got those parents that want their kid to clean their room and make their bed and pick up after every time that they, get their toys out. So, we can utilize this kind of systematic ebb and flow increase in demands to kind of support that individual in beginning to kind of learn those skills without it having to be every single day they have to do everything on that list. Because if you try to do that on a C access day, you're going to end up with, high levels of behavior and not learning at all. Where you're kind of on that black and the pendulum. So another kind of intervention tip that I love, and actually this one's been helpful in schools, I think. We call it kind of the drop the rope to stay in the engaged and learning zone. And this is where we are actually on purpose kind of reinforcing a lower level behavior so that we do, and I'm even going to use the word avoid, so that we avoid kind of that level 3, where we're getting huge behaviors for long durations of time that become, unsafe and dangerous, or they just take away from learning for a really long time. So, Katie, I think you kind of refer to this as giving yourself an out. Is that what you call it?
Yes, that's where I usually call it. Yeah.
Yeah. So Katie will talk about it as giving yourself an out. Like, how do I get out of here? And I talk about it like drop the rope. Like, all right, I made a mistake. I pushed the demands too high. I can see that I made a mistake. We're all human, right? Like we're allowed to make a mistake. Did we reinforce the behavior? Yes, we did. But we also made a mistake and evoked that behavior. So, kind of drop the rope or give yourself an out. And I think functional communication is always an out, right? Like just get that individual to kind of say out loud, stop, or I don't want to, or, I want that item, or I want you to play with me, or kind of whatever the function of that behavior is. And I'll let Katie talk about kind of how she does that. Because her and I it's the same strategy, but we utilize it a little bit differently, which is okay. It's still the same strategy.
I think one really big thing too to point out here, I think when we get that functional communication, some people have a tendency to want to get it in that like just right tone or with a please and a thank you. Right. And I think it's really huge to point out that like that's not our goal here. It's just to get that communication no matter really how big it is at that point. But my strategy with this, when I kind of feel like, sorry, there's a plane going overhead, of course, is when I kind of feel like I'm getting stuck and I might start getting behavior, or I might be getting myself into a power struggle, is I try to get myself to a yes, no question. So, hey, do you want to, go outside? Yes or no? And I give a visual with it. So that way, if the kiddo doesn't, like, they just keep ignoring me, I can kind of go to, oh, I'm wondering if it's a no, you don't want to go outside. You're thinking it in your head. Um, and so from there, usually I can shape it. So, I might say, oh, do you want a break? I might say, oh, yeah, I think you're thinking in your head, yes, you want a break. So I give the break. And I find if I do that a couple times in a row, next thing I know, the kid is somehow gesturing to the yes, like, yes, I want the break. And so then I can just kind of shape up that communication from there without getting into the power struggle over even responding at that point.
Yeah, totally. And that's where you're kind of delivering something from that hierarchy of reinforcement, kind of based on the kind of skill that that child demonstrated in that situation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
like even sometimes it's like to get access to something, like, oh, I think you want that, yes or no,
Yep. Yeah, totally.
Another thing I was gonna, and I don't know if I've told you this one yet that I came across is during parent training, I think we have to be careful too, because this is really reinforcing to the people in that kiddo's environment, because we're providing a lot of negative reinforcement for them at that point. And so
Yep.
I did have this happen where I had a parent who was like, oh, this drop the rope is amazing. And she was like, life is so easy. And that's when it's like, oh, hey, our pendulum is kind of, too far in that easy zone. We need to kind of swing it back the other way. So just a little word of warning.
Yeah, I mean, this is where our data really comes in too. It's critical using these strategies that we're relying on data to make some decisions. Like, are we moving forward? Are we seeing more level 1 behaviors on our noticing grid? Or are we seeing a huge increase in escape maintain behaviors? We really have to rely on that data to make sure that our interventions are doing what we've designed them to do, not the opposite.
Yeah, that's where that data, we were talking about data collection maybe the last week or the week before. One of my favorites is that the percentage of the time at level 1.
Yeah.
So especially supervising too. So when I'm not there kind of every day seeing where the push is coming from, if I look at data and I see a kiddo who's just been at a 1 across the board for weeks, I'm going to check in and say, hey, are we giving this kiddo opportunities to practice experiencing something that's hard and then working on getting back to just right. So it's a good way to kind of keep eyes on it without actually being there all the time too.
Yes. And I think this drop the rope strategy, or kind of the give yourself an out strategy, I like both of the terminology, and use whatever works best for you. But I think especially for kids that have a history of kind of trauma, or that really diverse history, this out strategy gives them a second to take a deep breath. Like, oh, this person is not going to fight with me. Like, this person is not going to, get on the struggle bus with me. This person's, it's okay. I think that can be really powerful. I've seen a lot of behaviors that we had in acquisition take off after a couple of times of using this strategy, because the kiddo was like, oh, like, Rosalie's not going to fight with me. Like, I don't have to win. Like, it was kind of almost relieving to them in that situation.
Yeah, this makes me think of a concept I heard from you for the first time. And I would love to hear if anyone else has ever heard of it, but like that bad attention. Like I always just kind of heard of like attention as attention. And so to think of it as bad attention, this whole, you're going to get into a power struggle with a kiddo and you're going back and forth, that's a lot of bad attention that kid is getting for that behavior, and not a lot of work on skills at that point. So
I know. So this is just for everybody's information, that good and bad attention is kind of part of our happy medium language. It's one of the language frames or language pairings that we teach to kiddos, specifically when we're seeing a lot of power struggles or a lot of verbal struggles. And now that I'm more in the ACT world, I've got to kind of revisit that language and decide if bad and good attention is ACT consistent. But
we could go with helpful or unhelpful, or friendly or not friendly attention.
Yeah, you could set that up. But a lot of kiddos really like hang on to that good and bad attention. And when attention is the function of their behavior, if you're power struggling with them and giving them a lot of attention, we're right right where we're looking to not be. And a lot of times parents love that good and bad attention language because it supports them in recognizing when they're giving a lot of that kind of negative or bad attention to the child, those verbal reprimands that a lot of us hang on to as parents that we think are going to reduce our child's behavior, but they're actually increasing it. I don't know if there's other parents out there that have that struggle, but I certainly do, even though I know better. So again, though, like we've got to rely on data, especially utilizing these strategies that are producing escape or are producing reinforcement, in the form, whatever the function of the behavior is. Certainly we've used this kind of drop the rope, even with tangibles like iPads or food or whatnot. And even with kind of attention, I think I gave an example of like a kiddo that really wanted attention, just like screaming, "I want you to play with me." I was like, oh, all right. Like, here I come to play with you. Obviously they did not get the highest reinforcer at that moment, but I definitely did join. I wasn't my like excited, exuberant self, but I did join them. So when we're talking about, and there's just, you guys can look at kind of the data collection. And then we really wanted to address that. Somebody brought up last week about, what happens when you have a learner that kind of, when they get that reinforcer, like it's almost like you have a chain of behaviors before they get their reinforcer. Like they can't wait for that reinforcer, whether it's the iPad, whether it's, a highly preferred engagement with an adult, whether it's a food item, whatever it might be, as the reinforcer. Like what happens when that is just like, it's so powerful that like you almost like lose them to the reinforcer for the rest of your session, or you have behaviors before you can even deliver the reinforcer. So I think while we talk through this kind of distress tolerance hierarchy, we'll use that example to kind of talk through kind of how we might build tolerance to kind of delayed access, denied access, or even like shared access, I think comes into mind when I'm thinking about things like that too, like those kiddos that just like cannot share the Legos, even though Legos are a shared activity, or it can be. So and this is kind of from easiest to hardest in terms of when we're asking an individual. And I think we've talked about this in a previous Crowdcast, so some people might be familiar with it. But kind of the easiest way to kind of build tolerance is just talking about a pretend situation kind of with that context. So if you've got a highly verbal learner who is like, I need my iPad and I need it now, that after they've completed whatever you've asked them to complete, or, did whatever you were kind of hoping to reinforce, then you get this, going up to a level 2 in order to kind of gain access to that reinforcer. If you can kind of talk about it in a pretend situation, like, hey, if I said, no, you can't have your iPad right now, what do you think you would do? Just kind of talking about it. Like, we're pretending like this isn't happening. I'm not taking your iPad away from you. I'm not going to give it to you, but I just want to, like, let's pretend for a second. Like, you can even get something out and be like, all right, let's pretend that this notebook is your iPad, and I'm going to kind of walk up to you. You're going to see it, and you're going to like, you're going to know it's your iPad and you really want it. And there's lots of emotion showing up, or, however you want the conversation to go. But just talking about it. Go ahead, Katie, what were you going to say?
I just wanted to clarify too that when you're doing this is like removed from the time that you're actually delivering the reinforcer. You want to practice this thinking and pretending outside of that situation so that that kiddo can then hopefully access it when the time comes, right?
Oh my gosh, thank you. Yeah. I mean, this is totally removed. Like, maybe it's a time and a location where the iPad isn't available or something for a little bit, but it needs to be removed from the situation and pretend, because it's hard. It's hard to even, talk about it or think about it. I've actually had clients that can't even engage in a pretend situation, where I've just kind of had to very gently, like, and just, hey, I want to talk about the iPad. I want to have a pretend conversation. And they're like, no. I'm like, oh, all right, thanks for letting me know. You don't want to talk about it right now. And then just keep coming back. Keep coming back. Not like every 3 minutes, but keep revisiting it, to provide opportunities for them to, hear, hey, I want to have this conversation. Hey, I want to have this conversation, just to hear about it. I guess that's really even one more kind of step back on this kind of distress tolerance, is just kind of hearing the question, not even engaging in like talking about it. So you can add steps to this hierarchy. Like, if your kiddo can't even talk about it, a pretend situation, maybe there's another step that's back there. It really just depends on your learner. So then, kind of after once they can kind of talk about it in a pretend situation, they can kind of even say, oh, well, I could use taking a deep breath to get back to a 1, or, I could slow my body down by doing a mindful minute, or, I could, whatever their replacement behaviors are on their noticing grid to stay at a 1. Once you kind of get there where they're able to do that in a pretend situation, you kind of up the ante a little bit. And this, again, we've got to kind of pay attention to those kind of A, B, and C access days too. Because just like, kind of building those behavior chains, you want to think about, where are they at? What can they tolerate today? And how can I keep my pendulum in that place where they're kind of at a 1, but pop into a 2 when something's kind of hard, and then able to come back down to a 1 to be successful and achieve kind of reinforcement at kind of the highest level that they can. So do you have other thoughts, Katie?
Yeah, I was thinking about our conversation we had earlier, where we're also kind of talking about the reactive piece of this. Like, there is that piece that we do removed, that we're trying to teach this skill, but reactively in the moment, I have the kid who, is so hyped up for the reinforcer, or has the reinforcer and then has a really hard time transitioning off. We were talking about, what do we do in that situation? And I think we were talking earlier, like, that's where we probably do engage a little bit of the drop the rope. How do I get myself to something functional here with this kiddo and the reinforcer, and then be willing to kind of sit in that moment and teach, right? Like, we were talking about that reinforcer is not going to be helpful to me if we get behavior every time it's delivered. So it's worthwhile to kind of stop and pause whatever else we're doing and target at what we need to around that reinforcer in that moment. But also, we're if we have to drop the rope in that moment, we know we're doing kind of what you said, is I need to, at some point, indirectly with this moment, teach this skill. So it's kind of like twofold.
Yeah. And I think, what were we saying? It's like a treatment detour, right? Like,
yes.
Be okay to do a treatment detour if you need to support the learner, right? Because, like, you've got this clearly highly powerful reinforcer that's probably sitting right at the top of your reinforcement hierarchy. However, there's a lot of there's a barrier to treatment access when you use it, right? Like, you're getting more behavior than you would if you weren't using it. I don't know, maybe they don't even have a lot of other reinforcers. Go ahead, Katie.
Yeah, I would say, I think we were talking about, like, the iPad, and that the treatment detour in that case would, like, I think we're talking about how I might go right into a distress tolerance there of putting my hand over the iPad and just saying, do you want more time? And in that moment, shaping it, into maybe them giving it to me for a little bit. So that's worth it in that moment for me to kind of detour and just put, like, the kid's going to have the iPad for a really long time now because we're doing distress tolerance and we're giving it back and forth, but it's so worth it in the long run to take that detour to teach that.
Yeah. And put a huge asterisk around this, that it's not just give them the iPad and, they have the iPad for the rest of the session. It's almost like you write up a whole new kind of treatment program in terms of distress tolerance. Like I need kind of highly powerful reinforcers in order to move some of these other targets that we have that are really hard. But now I've kind of got this problem, so I'm going to create some programming around this. How can how can we increase kind of tolerance to kind of delayed, denied access to kind of a highly preferred item? Because it's pretty likely if that happens with that item, the kiddo is probably going to have other items like that throughout their life that are going to be very reinforcing, that are going to create the same kind of behavior challenges. So treating that can be super beneficial for treatment in the long run. It also allows you access to that really highly reinforcing item. So, and again, it's not kind of a, they said I want more time on the iPad. So you kind of flip that pendulum all the way over to where they're at a 1 and happy the whole session. You're coming back, like Katie said, maybe you're working up to where even during that same session, they'll relinquish the iPad to you without behavior. Or maybe they'll even relinquish it and let you put it up and engage in another activity on kind of an A access day. Or maybe a B access day, you're giving them a little bit longer kind of duration kind of with the iPad, but still getting in there with those distress tolerance targets. And I think this is such a hard piece in schools for parents when they're like, gosh, you're just letting my kid play on the iPad all day. Like, what are you doing? And I'll kind of say, hey, come and listen to what we're trying to do. If I kind of just come in and say, hey, this iPad is a no, or like, hey, you got to wait for the iPad, whichever kind of angle we're coming from, I'm going to have a lot of behavior, and it might be like a 1 or 2 hour tantrum, or maybe it's even 30 minutes. Those are all like, that's kind of wasted treatment time. Like we're not going to, learn anything, because the next time that I, give him his iPad, I'm going to see the same thing. So I want you to listen to how we're trying to build his tolerance to being able to relinquish that iPad, or being able to wait and kind of delay access. Go ahead, Katie.
A huge tool I've found around reinforcers is I always try to work for my kiddos to be willing to engage with their reinforcer with me present. Because then on those harder days, I can use that. I can sit there and use, maybe I'm labeling happy medium that I'm seeing, as we're working together and we're engaging with this activity together. And then it just is also providing that opportunity for them to contact some social reinforcement too, if that's, motivating for them.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I think, we found kind of within Eclipse, reinforcement time is like, there are a few kiddos that they're like, I'm going to my room, just leave me alone. I don't even want you near me. But the goal would be really that we work to develop kind of that social relationship as one of the reinforcers. So, part of kind of some of our distress tolerance programming is actually like shared engagement with items like the iPad that is kind of highly reinforcing. Will they let us look over their shoulder? Will they let us kind of sit next to them and watch? Will they let us sit next to them and comment? Will they let us sit next to them and I get to hold the iPad? Will they let us sit next to them and I get to play a game? Oh my gosh, like even if it's for 10 seconds, like, do I get a, turn here? And then all the way up to like, hey, can I pick what we do today on the iPad? So really kind of thinking about what is that hierarchy of tolerance and where do you want to end up? And then how are you going to kind of get there? Again, kind of with your frame of staying at a level 1 and the ABC kind of access type stuff. So and does anybody have another example that they want us to run through, or go ahead, Katie?
I was just going to say, you said that so much better than I did. So thank you. That was a great way of explaining how I kind of do that distress tolerance to me engaging with them with a reinforcer. Thank you.
Oh yeah, those little steps. It's so, I think when you haven't done those little steps before, it's really hard to see the little steps. But then after you've done it a few times, you start to see the little steps, and then you start to see the fourths of a step and the halves of a step. And you really get kind of that beautiful ability to kind of shape that in the moment. And we've had a lot of success with RBTs kind of doing that in the moment too. So not needing that kind of higher level kind of expertise of somebody who's been doing this for a long time. So does anybody have another kind of like distress tolerance thing that it would be helpful for us to kind of like run through? I've never put pressure on people to say something, so don't feel obligated. And we can pop back to it. So we've kind of touched on this kind of throughout this presentation, but I will say the planned use of negative reinforcement is just almost necessary for kind of, tolerating increased numbers of people in the room. Katie's got this one. She's been doing that with the sibling type stuff. Oh my gosh. Anyway, go ahead.
So how will we run a distress tolerance to that?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm seeing things pop up. So Rosalie, you can explain this so much better than I can. I get my head all turned around.
So if I was gonna, all right, so we've got a kiddo where like antecedent clearly show that, that the more people in the room, the more likely we are to be kind of get to a level 2, and probably for sure a 3 if we go ahead and ask them to kind of pack themselves into a room with 25 classmates, or even like 5 people. So Katie and I actually ran a program like this for a kiddo that started out of school for 6 months, and he started his transition back into school in the green room. It was his room, like kind of furthest removed classroom that you could find, all by himself with blinds, where like we could lower the blinds so like he didn't even have to see other people. And so we kind of started out his tolerance just by being able to kind of walk to the bathroom and maybe see a person. And, then he'd be able to do kind of whatever he wanted. We provide a lot, like we would even leave the room for him to kind of have some time by himself. And then we kind of, the next step was kind of saying hello to kind of the building principal. And I know Katie is really good at explaining things. I don't know why you say that. She's very good at them. So I guess I just get to be put on the spot, right? Just teasing. So anyway, then we moved to kind of very predictable humans. So the principal of the school, who was kind of a natural behavior analyst, I would give her a BCBA if I could. She was just a gem of a human. So, we would kind of gently and slowly kind of introduce her into his space, and then, him into hers, which then kind of broadened the opportunity to interact with the secretary, the nurse, and kind of like the attendance person. So that was kind of the next shaping step. And again, on C days, that didn't happen. But on A days, we would say, hey, we're going to go run an errand for the office. Let's go talk to Jenny and see what she needs done. So, then we had kind of 4 or 5 people. Then go ahead, Katie.
We did expected and unexpected visits from people into his space, which was a big one. So I wouldn't have come up with this example, but now that you're talking about it, I'm like, oh yeah, I know.
Yeah. Well, and it's so fun. Like when you work together as a team like this, people start to see half steps that you don't, and that's how you kind of develop those those hierarchies of what you're going to try. And kind of like the next step with that was then, this kiddo was actually highly socially motivated, which was interesting given he didn't want to be around other people. And he wanted friends. So we asked the general ed teacher, like, hey, who would be, I want like 2 highly predictable peers, highly predictable. that we can say, this is what you're going to do. And then the peers would come and have, lunch or come and play a game with the knowledge of, he could always say, I'm done, I need you to leave, and that did happen a couple of times. Kind of all the way up, those little steps just kind of kept going to where we got to where he was, he would walk by the door of the classroom, pause for a couple of seconds, look in, see the kids, to where he would spend, 5, 10, 15 minutes sitting in the doorway of the classroom, to then, sitting in the classroom with all of the peers. Go ahead.
And I remember a big motivator we used to get him to sit in the doorway, to stay near the classroom for that long, was he was able to engage with his iPad, so his highly preferred, but he just had to be by the doorway. And then at one point the shift was, okay, now we're going to sit in the doorway for 5 minutes, but not with your iPad. You can get it when we come back.
These steps ebb and flow with the individual and the things that are motivating and reinforcing to them, in a way that you can provide exposure to them without it being so much exposure that they get to a level 3. And we definitely, within that process, made a few mistakes, had a couple 3s, and learned we're not doing that again. Or, it was a new behavior on our kind of C access day type stuff. So, so certainly happy to kind of talk more about that, but, getting that kind of ebb and flow between kind of increasing people to them, them allowing people to, more people to increase. It's very different walking into a room with a lot of people than having people slowly come to you. So that's kind of part of the shaping steps as well. I think that had we said, you need to go to the classroom and watch the kids first, I think it would have been a total fail. Whereas we had people slowly come to him, and that helped him build his tolerance to being around people.
I think too, to think about this again individually, because I have one kiddo right now, we're working on this distress tolerance to strangers, and we have found something is beeping at me. I don't know if you guys can hear it. We have found that if people kind of go in the doorway and hang there to slowly introduce themselves in, he has a harder time versus them just kind of coming in, getting down to his level and just saying, hey, I'm Katie, I'm going to go stand over there, and then go do that. So to think about that and to watch how your kiddo responds as these people are introduced too.
Yeah, being that detective of what does increase their level on their noticing grid, and then trying to, all right, what's that step? What do I need to do to reduce that? Right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't.
So hopefully, distress tolerance to averse sounds. That's a great one. So we know we've done this too, Katie, haven't we?
Yeah.
Sorry, people sneezing, clearing their throats. I'm just laughing out loud.
Siblings crying.
Siblings
clearing their throats was a good one.
Yep. Oh, I've even done kind of this programming with a fire alarm. Had a kid that was deathly afraid of the fire alarm. So if we kind of walk through kind of increasing our tolerance to kind of averse sounds, you kind of obviously have to first identify kind of what are the averse sounds, and then you have to get really creative in thinking about all right, how do I reduce exposure? So the fire alarm is actually a really good example. Because how do you reduce the sound of a fire alarm? I mean, fire alarms are fire alarms. So I actually started with being able to tolerate kind of an unexpected phone alarm, because phone alarms kind of weren't a problem, but the unexpected kind of made us think that it was a fire alarm. So supporting that individual and first being okay with kind of just an unexpected cell phone noise, I think was the first step that I started with on kind of distress tolerance to noises that were averse. And I think then worked on kind of different volumes of YouTube videos with fire alarms.
We did this with one of our guys too, and it was with the fire alarm. And I've done it with a lot of my kiddos now, where I try to take as much as I can with that noise, and make as much of the unexpected expected.
Yeah.
So for him with the fire alarm, it was like, hey, let's think about this. When the fire alarm goes off, what are you going to do? And it was like, well, I don't know.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, so there's part of the problem, like why this noise is aversive, because you don't have a plan. And so putting that plan in place too and practicing that piece, I think, helped with that desensitization to the sound also.
Totally. And that's that talking about the situation, right? Like, talk about it. You know, if they don't have a variety of things that they can do when things that they don't like happens, you know.
Yeah. Actually, and now I'm thinking about how this went. So that kiddo, we came up with a plan. Like, we were going to leave the building. We're going to go stand by this tree. And the first time the fire alarm went off, he bolted out of the building screaming, ah! But he ran to the tree. And
Yeah.
he was like, Katie, I did it. Did I do it? I stayed just right. Like, well, you did it. You did a great job following our plan. Next time we are going to work on staying at a 1, though, because you were not at a 1.
Oh, gosh. I laughed so hard. Because actually, one of the examples that I use for like being, you know, too big, too little, or just right is like when the fire alarm goes off, like you run out of the building, is one of my just rights. But definitely running out screaming is not just right. So, but running out is.
Yeah.
So, you know, so those averse sounds can be really tricky, you know, because we can't kind of flood them, you know, where it's like, all right, like, let's just sit through a bunch of fire alarms. You know, you've got to kind of sit through kind of those steps, and it feels like it takes forever. Again, you're like packing that slingshot, you're packing it up, and starting to pull it back to where, you know, they're able to talk about the noises. They're able to, you know, maybe they're even able to kind of like watch a video with some of the noises in it at a very low volume. You know, you've done some of that pre-teaching where they have a plan when the noise happens. They have behaviors that they can engage in when the noise happens. All of those things can be super beneficial to kind of increasing their tolerance and making whatever you can, you know, known, like Katie said, you know, like, what do they know about the noise? You know, where does it come from? What makes it, you know, all of that kind of education bit. So, all right. We didn't really talk much about kind of planned negative reinforcement. I think we talked about it a ton kind of throughout.
It's shocking that we didn't get through it all, Rosalie.
I think that's just history right now. So,
yeah.
No, but I think Katie and I will probably make one totally on the planned use of negative reinforcement, because it really does. It supports a lot of our learners in kind of getting where they are. So it looks like there's not that much to talk about, but I think there is a lot to talk about it. As well as I think, you know, I think we want to just get the word out there. Escape's not a bad thing. I do it all day long. Right? So does anybody have anything they want us to talk about? Like, you guys, I did not put, oh, I am so sorry. Somebody needs to yell at me about putting the CEU up. I'm so sorry.
I was getting ready. I was just waiting for a moment.
Yeah, somebody needs to yell at me for stuff like that. I just get going and I forget what I'm doing. All right, the CEU form's up. I'm going to actually put up the feedback form. If you guys have things. Uh-oh, what? Is it not working? There we go. Is it working now? I'm going to put the event kind of feedback form up. Okay, good. I'm going to put the event feedback. If you guys have stuff that you want us talking about, please, please, please fill out the form and, you know, let us know. We want these to be helpful for you guys.
Rosalie, I timed my battery like perfectly, so I'm about to die. So.
Okay, see you later.
I'm going to go. I'll see you next week.
Yep, we'll see you guys next week. We'll have something fun. Thanks, everybody. Bye.